Hello and welcome to the Vocal Advancement Podcast, a podcast for singing teachers by singing teachers. And I'm one of your hosts, Tom, and this is the lovely Heather.
Привет.
Hello.
I'm Ukrainian today.
I'm not attempting that one, so...
If you're listening out there and I have not said hello in your language yet, please let us know and I shall attempt to learn how to say hello in as many different languages as I can for the intros to these podcasts.
And then on the 100th episode, there will be a pop quiz for Heather.
Which I will fail. I've been learning some Ukrainian actually because in one of the choirs that I teach, I have two Ukrainian ladies who are staying with one of my choir members.
Nice.
Have joined my choir. I've come to join the choir and sing in the choir. But we sing. It's Christmas time at the minute while we're recording, so we are doing Carol of the Bells, standard choir song, but it's a Ukrainian song, Carol of the Bells, if you didn't already know that. It was written by a Ukrainian composer, and so they challenged me to try and sing it in Ukrainian.
Wow.
So I've been doing my best to try and learn to, sing it like that. Yeah.
Impressive.
I know, isn't it just? I can only do about 3 lines, but... I'm trying.
2027.
It's such a unusual language, obviously all of those Russian languages, it's not like trying to learn another European language.
Yeah, that's very strange with how they use their tongue differently from other languages in it. So yeah, that's quite impressive.
Challenge, but there we go. Get me.
Yeah. We expect the video to see the recording when it's done.
When I actually get that. I'm trying to get the rest of the choir to do it too. They're not quite as keen.
I can understand that.
Like, why don't you just sing the first bit on your own, Heather?
Yeah, they're probably like, I just want to get the harmony. You figure out the language. I'll just get the harmony first.
I'll just sing ding dong. That's it. But there we go. So who's on today's episode, Tom?
Well, today we are talking to the lovely Dr. Elizabeth Ann Benson. And Elizabeth did a webinar for us, and she was talking about the trends in CCM teaching that is the subject of her very impressive book that is out. And that took a while to get that out for some reason.
Yeah, she did a fantastic webinar just going through all of the, basically what she did was it was a huge research project where she went to lots of like key contemporary pedagogues and, figures within the vocal world and interviewed them essentially on their take on what their technique and their approach to teaching singing was. And then she kind of organized it by themes and went, okay, this is what all the people said about breathing. And this is what all the people said about belting, for example, and organized it into this book. So it is like a who does what guide to teaching singing, right? So it's not so much a book that teaches you how to teach singing. It's a book that shows you what everybody else is doing and what everybody's take is, which is fascinating. And if you like a bit of gossip, it's great for that. I got it just to see who said what.
I know.
I'm like, I wonder what they said about that. That's it. Let me find out.
But yeah, no, it's a great book, and it's when I started reading it, I was like, oh, is this just going to be a collection of scientific papers and stuff like that? But when you got into it, it's like, this is really interesting, and it's really, really very interesting to see the common similarities across approaches, but they describe it differently, or they use different language, or they have a different approach as to how they do teach it and use it with students. So yeah, it's a really very interesting book that I would definitely recommend people read if they're interested in that kind of thing. I mean,
for me, the reason it's really useful as a voice teacher to see what all these approaches are and how they talk about you, what language they use, like you say, is that if someone comes into my studio for a lesson and they have had lessons previously with a teacher from a particular organization or who has a particular approach or is trained with a particular person, I am now equipped to know when they say such and such, I know what they're talking about and how that then translates to maybe language that we might use that might be different. So I found it very useful for that, so that I can know exactly where they're coming from, what might be very similar in the way that I would approach it, and what might be a little bit different, so that I can, kind of gauge that. Really useful for that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's almost like a dictionary of this technique does this, and this is what it means. So yeah, it's a great tool for voice teachers. So I think we should talk to Elizabeth now.
I think we should. She has so much interesting things to talk about. Let's go talk to her.
And she gets brownie points because she has such an amazing sparkly background that you'll get to see if you watch the video. I want a sparkly background like that now. It's like a disco background.
So, welcome, Elizabeth. It's lovely to have you here. You did a fantastic class for us, and it was really, really interesting. And I just wondered, first of all, what inspired you? Shall I say inspired, or what possessed you to write that book that you wrote, all about all those different, techniques and approaches to teaching singing?
I thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. Good question. I think, really when it sort of goes back to my own journey, that when I was sort of coming out of my formal education and everything I had learned was great for classical singing, but that's not what the private sector marketplace was really demanding. And I just knew like I didn't have all of the skills that I needed to remain employed. I wanted to have a lot of students, and I wanted to, be able to earn a living. And so this is really the book that I wish that I had access to at that point. I had to go on my own adventure and, piece together a brand new education for myself, essentially. And so I, did a lot of individual training with a lot of the folks who ended up being in the book, and sort of went through, their formal study programs and, some private study as well. And, it took several years for me to gain the knowledge that I felt I'd really mastered for myself and for my students. And so, I really wanted there to be a shortcut. I wanted there to be a way to access that information without going to each individual methodology and going through their training. And the book, of course, isn't a comprehensive representation of all of these codified methodologies, but it does give you a little taste of what some of the core values and core systems are with those methods. And so I felt like it could also function as a little bit of a preview for folks if they're interested in maybe studying further and they want to invest the money and the time to go and do that, but they could get a little idea, a sense of what those programs are going to entail before they arrive and make the investment. So, it's really about, I think, access to information and just wanting there to be a central location where folks could go to begin to explore, because so many people coming out of university programs, especially here in the United States, are only have access to classical styles and genres and comprehensive education for classical. Do you think
that's changing at all?
I know it's changing in other countries for sure. And I think it is getting, I think we are understanding in higher education models that we need to get a little bit broader and more inclusive. And so, yes, there are more master's programs coming up, and there are, MFA degree programs now for voice pedagogy in music theater and other specializations. But I think, there's not going to be, I think, a large number of doctoral programs anytime soon that can, that has the faculty and the infrastructure and the, the recording studios and the equipment that one would need to really become an expert in CCM voice pedagogy. And CCM being a very problematic, incredibly large term that covers basically everything in the world except Western European classical singing.
I mean, it's definitely a step up from not classical.
It is. It is, but it's such a large term that we're not sure what it means a lot of the time. It's still very unclear. And I think in terms of a program of study, especially at the doctoral level, I was told many times with my dissertation topic, you need to make it more narrow, more specific, more, and doctoral programs that are very broad in scope, I think tend not to be as effective. So I think we have a real challenge in terms of matching the needs of the marketplace, and the fact that many teachers are needed in these areas, but we don't necessarily have the educational systems in place yet to provide those teachers in the numbers that we need just to match the needs of the marketplace.
So your then departure into exploration of CCM, was that purely kind of market driven? In that, yes. That's what people wanted to learn to sing.
Yes, exactly. So when I finished my, I was all but deserted. So I'd finished all my coursework. I had a baby and decided I didn't want to live in New York anymore with a young infant. And so moved to Colorado in the Western United States. And there, the marketplace was I had a job at a community music school teaching private voice lessons just outside Boulder, Colorado. And there was, great high school music programs and, large budget high schools to put on beautiful productions, Les Mis and shows that are, wow. Really take a lot of effort and talent to produce. And there was very much demand in that community for musical theater training for pre-college students in particular. So I taught for 5 years, the sort of 13 to 18-year-old sector, and all the demand there was for musical theater. And I recognized pretty early on that my students were all going to belt, whether or not I said it was okay or said they should or thought they should, regardless of my influence. They were going to be doing it in the car and in the shower and, whenever in karaoke and with their friends and at auditions. And so I pretty quickly had to reevaluate what I had been taught in my classical training, which was that belting was dangerous inherently and should be avoided, And I thought, I just don't think that could possibly be true when you have folks with really long careers doing it 8 days a week and still having a voice after 20, 30 years in the industry. I thought, Patti LuPone can't be doing it wrong, So I sort of went back and said, okay, there's got to be a way to do this safely, in a way that I understand how it functions and that I'm able to navigate it myself in my own voice and also to lead my students through that process. So it was really, it was very market driven, but I was also curious. I just wondered why have I been told, oh, just stay away from this entire topic or stay away from this entire register when I thought I've got 2 registers. Why am I being told not to use one of them entirely when that's where I talk? And it just seems to make no sense. So it was really just about, critical thinking and wanting to kind of reevaluate maybe the motivations behind why I might have been taught to avoid certain things or why I might have been told with no evidence that certain behaviors are dangerous. So I wanted to dispel all those myths and really get to the bottom of it and understand it myself.
I love that. There's so much more research going on within the CCM field these days. Do you think there's still, teachers teaching, academically like that are still of the opinion that belching is bad for you and you should avoid it? Or do you think the research is starting to change that somewhat?
Well, I do think that the research is providing evidence to disprove that belief. So I know that the research is out there and voice science is informing our pedagogy more than ever. But I don't know that everybody is reading all the research. So I'm sure there are teachers out there who are still doing things the way that we did them 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or maybe even more. But I do think that the younger generations of pedagogues, and my research certainly showed this too, are really interested in keeping up, that they're wanting to know what's out there and what's new and what's changed. One of the studies that came out recently, right, that showed that caffeine is not a diuretic and that we can all drink our coffee and still be good singers. For example, that was such an exciting piece of research to come out, and it's changed
I was quite happy about
lives.
That one.
Yes. It's a huge deal, right?
She says with a coffee in her hand.
Exactly. So I think that, it's not just about, foundational beliefs, but, even small things like that and sort of advice that we would give our students on vocal health and hygiene. I had to go change one of my handouts that I gave out a lot of the time to correct it to say, yay, you can drink your coffee, not a problem, and people still come in with the belief of like, oh, never drink milk, never drink coffee, never, with sort of these, beliefs. And I'm like, actually, guess what? You can drink your coffee, because we have evidence showing that it's safe. So, it's one of those things where, voice teaching, it's a very diverse group of folks that are out there doing it with a very diverse spectrum of backgrounds and training. And, the truth is you don't need any training at all to, hang out your shingle out there doing it with a very people who are maybe instrumentalists by training who also teach voice. And you get people who are, absolute diehard voice experts with multiple degrees. And, those folks are doing essentially the same job. So I think that, like any field, you're going to have people who come from different backgrounds with different beliefs and different levels of curiosity about what is changing. I also think there's so much research coming out that it's impossible for everybody to stay on top of absolutely everything. It's a little
like
overwhelming.
A full-time job. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it's so nice that we're seeing this trend come up where people can refer out more and not feel like we have to maintain this master apprentice model where I know everything as the teacher. I think it's a relief as a teacher that I can say, I know a little tiny bit about hip hop. I can get you started, but then I'm going to send you to like 12 people that will do it 100 times better than I do, because I'm not insecure about that. And, I know that that's going to benefit you, the student, and that you're going to get what you need by me saying, hey, I don't know enough about this to really be a good partner for you in exploring this. And that way the student can still get what they need. And I don't feel the pressure of having to become an expert in everything.
Yeah, that's such an interesting and such a valid point. And we actually had this conversation in our previous podcast with Lynn Hilton. We were talking about this belief that teachers have about the master apprentice, as you say. So yeah, it's good to hear you talking about that. And I'm curious as well because I have your book, and after your webinar, I went out and bought the book because I was like, this is really interesting. I want to know. And what I haven't finished it yet, but what struck me so far is just the sheer logistics that must have been involved to bring all these different people together into this book. I mean, it must have been like herding cats, as they say.
It was a lot of emails. It was a lot of just constant emailing. Yeah, it was. And part of that was just my own, naivete and never having taken on a project of that scale before. And I wanted to capture a broad swath. I wanted to make sure I had folks from the, younger generations who were represented. I wanted the pioneers in the book. I wanted major methodologies represented well. And I wanted there to be an international presence as well, so that it wouldn't just be, an American perspective. And that's why we ended up with so many folks in the book. If I had my druthers, to do a second edition, I would be much more mindful, I think, of some demographic spectrums and making sure I have really good representation and cultural representation from maybe a wider spectrum of genres. But I think that, yes, it was a lot of logistics in terms of the emailing back and forth and, the proofreading and the transcripting and, sort of all of that. And in some cases, getting folks to edit things down, so that we could, end up with good representation, because I didn't want there to be, 400 word response from one person and like a 2,000 word response from another person, just so that we could sort of, maintain some parity in terms of, who's getting space in the book.
So you sent it out as like a questionnaire then, did you, to each of these people and asked them to write their answers back rather than meeting with them?
For most folks, yeah. Written correspondence was actually the most efficient way of doing things, and least time consuming. But there were a few who preferred to do a Zoom interview, which is how I did it for, I think, 3 or 4. But it wasn't, there was 25 different perspectives represented. So the vast majority preferred written. And so there was, follow up and, deadlines and things like that. And then folks who needed more time or things came up. And then there was, of course, the organizing of it all. So once I got all the responses back, then reorganizing it all by topic and then doing the sort of subject analysis for each of the topics that, that was also pretty time consuming. So I thought the book would take maybe a year. It took 4 years. So from the very beginning, when I first designed my, IRB study application so that I could just begin contacting people to even see if people wanted to participate in such a book, all the way to when it was finally published, was a full 4-year project.
And so is this the final book you were ever writing in your life? Or do you think you'll be mad enough to try and do something again in the future?
Well, I definitely needed a little break from book scale topics. And so I turned my attention more towards articles and sort of shorter term projects that I could complete in a more sort of satisfactory timeline. But also my interests shifted, and I didn't have any interests that I thought were really on the scale of a book for a little while. Mm-hmm. And I just tried to keep an open mind. And I thought, when a book scale topic presents itself to me, I'll be open to coming back to it. And that may be happening now. So I'm sort of, I'm a few years out from the book coming out, and so I may be entertaining that idea again here.
So I was going to say, your research has followed more of a kind of a inclusion, diversity sort of perspective now, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely very much entrenched in social justice and the intersection of voice pedagogy and social justice and what that looks like in different facets. And so, that really did come out of the CCM research, in that, we need genre equity. And we struggle with that and getting the same resources allocated toward non-classical styles as we do for, especially in higher educational models. There's just a lot of infrastructure in place to support classical music, and less so for CCM, though that is changing. And I do think it's improving. And we're recognizing that it's, in order for music programs of all genres to survive, we need to be more inclusive, and we need to represent the different cultures that have contributed to the musical landscape in the United States, which is very, very broad. And so I do think that there's changes happening there. But then, it became a little bit more specific because we had the Black Lives Matter movement happen in the United States. And that really caused me to want to look at how racism was manifesting in music programs, which is something that, we don't necessarily draw a really straight line to those things. But if you, for example, if you encounter someone who has a bias against hip hop music, what is that about? I wanted to start asking the questions like, why do people say rap isn't music, and what is that really about? And then looking at sort of the history of popular music and the rise of the popular music genres here in the United States, coming out of jazz and blues, and then into rock and roll coming out in the 1950s. And then sort of what did that look like? So we have a lot of music that's styles that are based out of people of color, coming out of jazz and coming out of blues and turning into other styles like R&B that have, been here forever. And so if we're excluding those styles, it's also sending a message of sort of cultural exclusivity, which I think is not reflective of our modern society. And so to say that music is, it's okay for music to continue to be segregated, or for us to continue to sort of perpetuate a Eurocentric model where we put a hierarchy in place and we say classical music is the best. For me, that's problematic. As an American, we're not even talking about American music being the best. We're saying European music is the best, and should get the most resources.
That's a very good point.
And I thought, that just seems weird to deny our own culture.
Absolutely.
So it's really all tied into that. So it came out of that idea of wanting to see more broad genre and cultural representation, and for there to be a seat at the table for folks who don't come through classical music first as like a filter, and then we'll let you do other things. And I thought that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So looking at ways to
even boiling down to notation of music.
Yep.
Very Eurocentric, right?
Very Eurocentric. Absolutely. And it's also, to sort of, for there to be an implicit requirement that people read Western European notation before they get to college, for example, this excludes folks who are, especially singers, who might be incredible performers who've come up through an oral based training like gospel choir, or, we think of a lot of sort of church singing. None of that is notated. It's all done by ear. And so these folks are going to be excellent at improvisation or riffing or harmonization on the spot, or, some of these skills that we don't learn in classical training. And it doesn't mean that they are not qualified, to be really successful in a college music program. It just means that they have to learn a notational system that doesn't actually work for a lot of genres. It was not built for gospel singing. Nope. So again, like that's like an obstacle. If we're saying, oh, you have to read this Western European notational system, who are we excluding by having there be that requirement? And so one of the things I did in my program was I made a new class that is an intro to reading music, and it's meant for just to meet this exact sector of people who come in with a lot of talent and a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge, but they don't read Western European notation. And so, but I think even just labeling it that, not saying this is how we write music. That's not true. That's how we write some styles of music. And this is one of the systems, and perhaps the one that's most widely used now, but it's not built for every style. And we don't even have symbols and tools to represent all of the sounds that we might make in different genres. And so you're absolutely right that we want to re-examine these things, like because we want a diverse student body. We want a diverse faculty body. We want to represent a lot of different cultures, and we don't want to accidentally miss out on the enrichment that will bring to any musical atmosphere or, learning environment, that curiosity. So that's why my research program really turned to more issues of social justice and looking at what that looks like in the classroom, and particularly in the singing voice studio, because we don't always, when you're in a one-to-one teaching environment, you have tremendous influence over your students, and that's something that I don't take lightly at all. And it's really important to me that my students feel seen and heard and empowered. And, that I don't accidentally hurt somebody by saying, oh, I hate that particular style of music, but that's the style of music that student like grew up living and breathing and loves, And so then what does that say to that student that I'm just dismissing outright an entire genre, So things like that, just making sure my personal preferences, what I listen to in my car doesn't have a place in the voice studio. If a student wants to, work on a particular style of music, even if I don't like that style, I should learn a little bit about it and help that student and not discourage them. That's the most important thing.
But it's still okay for me to tell my husband that his music sucks, right?
Well, if he's your student.
Because he's not my student now, so that's okay, right?
Yeah. We can, of course, still have our preferences. There's nothing to say, like, you're not allowed to like certain things more than other things. But that doesn't mean
don't diminish other people's.
Yeah. And my taste shouldn't supersede what my student wants to do, So the student's preferences are equally valid.
Absolutely. Fascinating stuff. So what is your next research project going to be focused on, Elizabeth? Give us a sneak peek.
In the middle of a really exciting project with co-author Kate Rosen, co-investigator. We are doing a study right now on the experiences of large-bodied singers in singing training programs, and particularly looking at what their experiences have been in the voice studio. So in those one-to-one training situations, and how size has been treated, because the industry is not a friendly place for people of size, and singers in fat bodies encounter just tremendous discrimination on a daily basis in general society and in medical situations and in learning environments. And so this is, again, sort of looking at dismantling implicit bias and things we've been taught. Even the saying, it's not over till the fat lady sings, like, what's that about? Where did that come from? Why do we say that? Is that still okay?
See, I find that funny. I use that to my advantage on a regular basis.
Well, it's a really interesting topic of study, and it's not really been tackled.
Absolutely. So what have you got some early findings? What are you kind of,
right now,
emerging right now?
So what we've done so far is that we've written a two-part article that's going to be coming out next year about the context and the culture of being a fat singer moving through the world like that, and then looking at sort of pedagogical adaptations that we might make as teachers in ways to make our voice studios more inclusive for singers of all sizes. So, for example, one of the things that I think is really important to consider is this practice of standing in front of a mirror for the entire duration of a voice lesson.
Stand to the size of the mirror.
you got a wall of mirror.
Yeah, a wall of mirror. I don't make them stand in front of it. They get to stand over there. It's fine.
But I mean, that's an inclusive act that you've just done, because standing in front of a mirror and watching yourself sing doesn't work for every person. And it may be actually more distracting than helpful for people with dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, or a history of eating disorders, or just, who struggle. And I think that we can't possibly know our students' personal histories and their, what their perception of their bodies are. People who appear thin can also have body dysmorphia and a history of eating disorders. We don't know, because that's totally beyond our scope of practice as voice teachers. And it's not our business necessarily to know. And so we can't make assumptions either way based on what somebody looks like. So, for example, we suggest in our article that you have a covering on your mirror, and that you let the student know that if they would like to remove the covering for their lesson or for any portion of their lesson, that they are absolutely empowered to do so at any time, but that the covering starts on the mirror. And that way the student doesn't have to worry. And I actually just started doing that this semester in my studio, and all semester long, no one has removed the covering, which I think is really interesting, because
interesting.
I used a mirror incessantly as a student, standing and looking and learning, and it was a very effective tool for me. But that doesn't mean that that's true for everyone. And I've definitely had students before who will like fidget really kind of incessantly, fixing their hair, fixing their clothes, in front of the mirror. And I at times have said, like, okay, let's put our back to the mirror so we can, just feel what's happening and not worry about, how we're looking. And so I think that, it really does make a big difference. It can be a really effective tool for learning, but you can also use a hand mirror if you want, to look at articulators or jaw or, specified areas of the body, and it can be just as effective as the full length mirror. And then it doesn't introduce the sort of surveillance of the
anxiety
body.
of it.
Yeah, the potential, and so just small things like that, and my students have all, and I explained it all to them as to why it was there, because I have kind of a sheer covering and it looks a little bit like Shiva, and so I wanted to clarify to my students why the mirror was covered. And so I sort of explained it to them, and they went, oh, well, that's really cool. Thank you for doing that. That was sort of the response, was like, oh, they hadn't really thought about it, but just, it's a small act that can have a large impact for certain students. And again, it's like, if we don't know the trauma history of our students, we're not supposed to know. And so it's sort of like, let's be cautious. Let's, play it safe, and also pass along some empowerment to the student, so that they still have the tool available if they would like to use it, but not to make it mandatory.
That's some great advice.
So this is what we've done so far. And then we are also in the middle of our research gathering process. So we're doing interviews now with folks, and we're putting together, we have about over 60 participants in the study so far. And we're doing a sort of combination of written interviews, Zoom interviews, phone interviews, depending on, the preferences of our participants. And then we'll be, doing some analysis. So like I said, it could very easily get up to a book scale project. For the moment, we're gathering data and figuring out what we want to do with it going forward.
And so that was the first part you said comes out next year, is that right? Yes.
So the first part, which is the culture, context, and then pedagogical recommendations for inclusion, that will come out next year. And then hopefully we'll be sharing then our results from this study that we're doing right now. And, the stories are absolutely fascinating. And it seems, we've been really surprised by the turnout of participants. And it seems like, especially the Zoom interviews and the phone interviews where you get to interact with folks, people really want to tell these stories. They want to talk about their experiences, positive and negative. But it's definitely something that for so long was such a taboo topic, and just very, very hard to talk about. It's very emotional for a lot of folks. But it seems like it's time. Like, it seems like we're all ready to talk about it and to hear about it. And as uncomfortable as it is, to hear, upsetting stories and things that have happened in people's past, if we're not talking about it, then how are we going to fix it? How are we going to make sure it doesn't happen again? And how are we going to shift the industry? Because I think, certainly in terms of size discrimination, I think the industry is often blamed, and like I personally as a teacher, well, I don't think that you need to lose weight, but the industry thinks you do, and that sort of, but then what are we doing? We're perpetuating something then as teachers that could harm your student. It can hurt your student. And do we want to be doing that? Or do we want to be advocating for change, advocating that the industry needs to change, not the individual singer's body? And that really, if we want to be telling stories that include our diverse population, we need bodies of all sizes on stage representing the world. That's accurate. And if we're only seeing people who look a certain way, then we're not really getting the full palette of stories that we want access to.
Oh, I feel like I need to go and change the world now after that. I'm going to go and buy a cover for my mirror.
You need a big cover.
I like looking at myself in the mirror.
Well, then you should have it open.
I want it for me.
That's your. You should be empowered though for your preferences. Yes.
Oh, dearie me.
It is amazing. So we have had in other conversations we've had in this podcast, just the sheer responsibility that lies on our shoulders as voice teachers with the students in front of us. And I, like you said, anybody can enter this field. It's very unregulated, and we have this, responsibility that we should be doing our best to learn and provide, as you say, an empowering and welcoming environments to our students that's inclusive. So yeah, it's a really important message for people listening to understand this and just understand the power. I mean, this, like, even we've talked about just the way that you give feedback to somebody, how you provide constructive criticism to them about their singing, how important it is to use the right wording.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Well, and I think too, this, Gen Z that's coming up, I have a 15-year-old daughter, who, continually sort of reminds me that this generation has no tolerance for our patterns and our, systems of power that are exclusive. Like they just think it's all ridiculous, And so this generation of students coming up, they have different expectations for how we are going to comport ourselves as teachers. And it's very much they seem not to be afraid as a generation to push back if they don't like what's happening, or if they feel that it's, disempowering, so I think that it's, the expectations have really changed. I've been in higher education for 9 years, and even just in those 9 years, the scope of what I'm responsible for, in terms of creating that environment, what that looks like for the student has expanded and, gotten larger and larger, and includes all this social justice work now, which I never would have thought, as an undergraduate music major, that would eventually be something I would need to know that would really play an active role in how I teach every day. So it's, and of course, there's nothing in my study programs of study that would have prepared me for what I now need to know every day. So I think that you're right. It is a really broad, but I think also that's just the atmosphere of teaching too, that the students are the client, right? They're going to demand a certain level. And if they don't get it, they'll take their business elsewhere. And that's not just true in the private sector, but that's also true in university programs, and, you have to provide a welcoming environment, or the students will speak up.
And absolutely, so they should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So Elizabeth, if people want to find out more about you, or they want to get a copy of your book, can you just tell us where people can find you?
Yes, the easiest way to find the book is Amazon, but you can also go to the Compton Publisher website. You can order it there. And I have my own website, elizabethannbenson.com, and you can go there and learn more about me, or you can find my profile through Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama, the Department of Theater and Dance. So not next door to the music department. But theater and dance, that's where the musical theater program is housed. And so that's where I live. And then I'm also very happy. There's a contact me page on my website. And I love it when folks reach out, especially if they've heard, me talking about something and they want to talk further. I love that. So you can find me there or on social media.
Awesome. And we will put links to all of those in the show notes as well for people so they can find them. But it's been lovely to chat to you, and it's been lovely to see the webinar as well. And as I say, I immediately went out and bought the book straight after the webinar because I was just fascinated to read about all the different things. So just thank you for sharing with us.
And you wanted all the gossip.
I did. I wanted to see what people had said.
All juicy gossip. Who said what?
Yeah.
You get it straight from the source. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
So that was Elizabeth then, and as you saw, her sparkly background is fabulous.
Oh, do you know what? I could pick Elizabeth's brains for hours and hours and hours. She's just, a terribly interesting person. She's got some really interesting ideas and research projects going on. Fascinated.
So, and she's one of these people that's like I'm beginning to discover as we interview more and more people that are just so generous with their time and their knowledge and their expertise and just share openly and talk about it. And it's so wonderful to sit down and have a chat with these people that are just so passionate about it and want to share it and tell you about it.
Absolutely.
And
even after we stopped recording, we still hung around and chatted for another half
hour.
I was picking her brains on all kinds of things.
See, I told you we're nosy. This is the only reason we do the podcast, is for our personal vocal development.
Well, it's fascinating. I was having a debate with her about, it wasn't a debate. She was agreeing with me that, a lot of the research comes from, people who work in academia, and therefore, because academia is primarily classical, especially in the US, most kind of high end degrees and masters and things to do with singing are all classical based. It means that a huge amount of the research that's coming out is done on classical singers. And there's not quite as much research done on, contemporary styles of music. And that's because if you're outside of academia, no one pays you to do the research. So you can do research, but you have to do it off your own steam, and you have to invest your own money in it. And then if you get published, nobody pays you to be published. So you don't get paid if your research paper gets published in a journal. So there's really no kind of financial gain unless you're in academia and it's a requirement of your job to do it.
Yeah, because, I imagine doing that kind of research is not cheap, just to do the actual research.
Absolutely. And certainly, it's prohibitive. If you want to do some, research that involves any kind of stroboscopy, anything like that, I mean, forget it. You've got to pay to use medical equipment. That is going to cost you an arm and a leg. And I'm not sure you'll see much of that money afterwards. So unless you're in a university setting where they have access to that, that you can use, it is quite difficult. But she was saying that the current research project she's working alongside a teacher who is outside of academia. And she was saying that's why they've partnered up, because she has the resources from being inside of working in academia. And her research partner is just someone who had an interest in an idea and wanted to research something, which I think is a great compromise.
Yeah, absolutely. Best of both worlds, isn't it?
Yeah. But there we go. That's me just going off of my soapbox again. Right. What's our next episode, Tom?
I don't know what our next episode is. Let's just find out what the calendar says.
Do we know what our next episode is? If we don't, it's fine. They'll tune in. They'll figure it out.
We don't know what our next episode is yet, but I do know that we have 4 wonderful people lined up. So it could be any one of those 4 people.
Oh, potluck. Well, you'll have to make sure that you are tuned in.
Subscribed.
How do they subscribe and tune in, Tom?
Yeah, so what you want to do is go to your favorite place that you consume podcasts and then search for the Vocal Advancement Podcast. And there you will find all these delightful episodes. Make sure that you're subscribing and following us so that you can get notified when the Potluck Podcast... Ooh, that's a great name. Potluck Podcast.
We should just rename the podcast right now.
I like that. But yeah, make sure you're subscribed and you'll get notified when that next episode comes out. And we would really appreciate if you're enjoying the shenanigans and biscuits and languages of the world, amongst other things, that you could leave us a little review and tell us, so that would help our ratings.
That would be fab.
Yeah, nice words. Tell us your favorite biscuit as well in the comment.
On up the biscuits again.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you for.
You've enjoyed listening to our rambles.
Today, I would say today was quite a highbrow ramble. It felt very intellectual. Ramble.
Yes, of course, because we are intellectual people, clearly.
Sometimes. Every couple of episodes is a glimmer of hope for us. Next episode will descend back into the usual chaos.
We'll just stick to the biscuits.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Well, yeah, thanks for watching. Nice to see you. Take care and we'll see you soon.